Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to another GameMaker tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to create a simple 3D dungeon crawler using GameMaker Studio, and this is going to be what it looks like right here. Okay, here I've got the finished version up. You can see we can navigate through this dungeon, make turns, and it looks pretty cool. It's not going to take us very long to get this far. You'll be surprised at how little code is required to make something like this. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing you're going to need to do is download this file right here, 3D Dungeon Crawler Start. You can do that by going to learn.heartbeast.co, clicking on the blogs, going to Simple 3D Dungeon Crawler, and you can see right here I make the file available for download. There'll be a link to this blog in the description as well. And if you'd rather do the blog version than watch the video, that's an option. Okay, once you have the file downloaded, double click on it. As you can see, this is mainly a blank project. There are a few sprites right here that we'll be using for textures, and a player sprite that we'll be using as a collision mask for the player. The first thing you need to do is when you're using a texture in 3D, you need to set that sprite to be used as a texture. So we'll want to set these three textures right here, or these three sprites, to be used as textures. And the way you do that is you just check this little checkbox right here, use for 3D, must be a power of 2. Now what does that mean? That means that this sprite needs to be a dimension that is a power of 2. So 32 by 32 luckily is a power of 2, so that will work great. So we're just going to do used for 3D, used for 3D, and used for 3D. Now that all three of those are ready, we're ready to move on to the next step. For the next step, let's start with the player object. Create a new object and name it object underscore or O underscore player. That's how I'm going to name it. And give it a sprite of sprite player. Add an event, a create event, go to control and drag over a code action right here. Inside of here, we're just going to create some variables that we'll be needing for the player character, and we're also going to start the 3D drawing. So first type initialize the player. We need to create a variable for the player's Z, and we're going to set that equal to 16. Because GameMaker is primarily a 2D engine, there isn't a built-in Z variable, but that's not a problem. We can create our own. Now we're going to create a variable called dir, which is just going to stand for the direction that the player is facing. Now because we're going to be drawing in 3D, we need to set the default draw color to white. So set the default draw color to white. Draw set color C white. Then we need to set up 3D. Start 3D drawing, D3D, start. And that's all we need to do inside here for now. Press the green check mark. Now we're going to add a new draw event. So add event, draw, draw. Drag over a code action. And we're going to draw the projection. First though, we need to get the direction that the player is facing and convert that into an X and Y offset and basically convert it into vector values. And in order to do that, we're going to use the function lengthdir. Var vect x equals lengthdir x. 32 is going to be the distance and the direction is going to be dir, which is the direction the player is facing. Var vect y equals lengthdir y, 32 dir. If you see these, basically you can middle click on these to open up the help file, And it just allows us to convert a length and a direction into an X and Y offset. So that's really convenient. Now we're going to actually set the projection. D3D set projection. And we can just use the very basic one right here. Okay, this has a lot of arguments that it takes, but they're actually just 3 points. The first point is the direction that this is basically setting up the camera. So the first point is the location of the camera. So that should just be our player's current location. So X, Y, and Z. The next point is the location that the camera looks to. So we're going to use the offsets that we created up here using the direction in order to get those values. So X plus vector X, Y plus vector Y, and then we're just going to use Z as well because the height that we look to can be the same height. If you were to change this, your character would be looking maybe down a little bit to the ground or maybe up a little bit higher if you made this lower or higher. But we'll just have the character looking straight forward. The last point tells the projection which direction is up. So this is a really easy point. We can just do 0 for the X, 0 for the Y, and 1 for the Z. And that will tell it that up should just be in the Z axis. So up is the Z axis. Before I forget, you need to make sure and set the player's depth to a really high value because the player is drawing the camera. Because of the draw order, it needs a really, really high depth to make sure that the camera can actually see all of the other objects in the game room that are being drawn. So I'm going to set mine to 10,000. That should be high enough. Okay. Now we need to create some walls. Create a new object. Name this object wall. Give it a sprite of sprite wall. Add an event, create event, go to control, drag over a code action. Now, in order to draw a sprite as a texture in 3D, we need to get the texture from that sprite. This is really easy. I'll show you how to do that. We're gonna store our texture inside of a variable called wall text, and we'll use sprite get texture in order to get that texture. Now for the sprite that we need to get a texture from, we can just use our sprite index, which will be the wall texture or the wall sprite. So sprite index, and then since you can't really do animations natively, we need to pass in a sub image. We're going to just do 0. Add an event, add a draw event, drag over a code action, and now we're actually going to draw the wall. Now there are a few different ways to draw the walls, and there are some ways that are better than others because of performance. Since this is a beginner tutorial, I'm just going to show you the very easiest way to do it, and it should work pretty well for most cases. So we're going to use D3D draw block. Since our sprite has its origin up in the top left-hand corner, it makes it easier for us to draw this block. We can just do X. We need to pass it 2 points, a texture, and then repeat values. So for the first point, we'll do X. For the second point, we'll do Y. For the third point, we'll do 0 because that's, or for the third value, we'll do 0 because that's 0 will be just a 0 on the Z axis. For the second point, we're going to do X plus 32, Y plus 32, and then for the next Z, we'll just do 32. For our texture, we're going to use wall text, which is the variable that we saved and got the texture with. And then for the H repeat and V repeat, we're just going to do 1 and 1. So our texture will only repeat one time across this block. Press OK. We're almost ready to test our game. The next thing we need to do is set up the room. Press OK on the wall, create a new room, name this room 1. I'm going to give it a width of 256, a height of 256, and a speed of 60. We need to set up the view for this room. So go to Views, enable the use of views, visible when room starts. I'm going to use 640 and 360 for the width and height of the view. And then for the port on the screen, I'm going to use 1280 by 720. Let's add some objects. First, we're going to add some wall objects. Oops, that was the player. We can't stretch these out because we're using D3D draw block. And so we have to have multiple wall objects in our room like this. And that's one of the reasons that I said there are other ways that you can do this that maybe you're going to be just a little bit better. That looks good for now. Let's add the player. I'm going to change the snap to 16 by 16. That will allow me to add the player right here. Although the player's starting direction is facing 0, which is going to be to the right. So that might not be a good place for a player to start because then there's just going to be this wall in his way. I guess we can remove that wall and that fixes that problem. Maybe we'll add the wall right here. That looks good. Okay. Before we run our game, let's create a ceiling and a floor. So create a new object. We'll name this object ceiling and floor. Add an event, create event, drag over a code action. And we're going to get the textures for both of these. In the same way that we did with the walls. Now for the horizontal repeat and the vertical repeat, we need to use the room width and room height in order to make sure that they repeat at exactly 32 by 32 blocks in the same way that our walls are. So we're going to say hrep equals room width divided by 32, vrep equals room height divided by 32. Okay. Add a draw event, drag over a new code action, draw the ceiling and the floor. Now we're going to use the same function for both of these, which is draw D3D draw floor. So even though we're using it to draw a ceiling, that doesn't matter. It works for both. So let's draw the ceiling first. We'll use 0 and 0 for the first. So we're going to pass it 2 points again. The first point is going to be 0, 0, 32 because we want the ceiling to be 32 units high. For the second point, we're going to do room width, room height, and then 32 again because we want this point to be 32 units high. That's how high the ceiling is. Now we pass in our texture, seal text, and then the horizontal repeat and vertical repeat. Now we can copy this right here, Control C, Control V, and use it for our floor, but we'll just use 0 and 0 for the Z values, and then change seal text to floor. And that should work fine. Okay, now add that object to your room. You can add it anywhere in your room. I'm just going to add mine right here. Save your game, and you're ready to run it. And look how cool that is. Not very much code to have a 3D dungeon already set up and working. Okay, we have the 3D set up, it's working, but there's not a lot of depth to it, and our player can't move in this room yet or move inside of this maze, and that's kind of boring. So let's fix that. Open up the player object, go into the create event. We're going to add some new variables. We're going to use a little bit of what we learned in my previous blog post about the lerp function. In order to use the lerp function, we're going to need some target variables that we're going to move towards. So create target variables for movement. Target dir equals dir. Target x equals x. Target y equals y. I'll show you how we're going to use those. After we've set up the 3D drawing, we're also going to set the fog. This will add some depth to the game. We need a color though, so dark purple. This is the color that actually is inside of the wall textures, so it looks really nice, and that's why I chose it. Make color red, green, blue. Red value is 27, blue value is 3, or green value is 3, and blue value is 59. D3D set fog, true, dark purple, which is the color that we just made. So we have to enable it, we have to set the color, then we have to set a start, which is the distance to the projection or our camera. So starting 16 units away from the camera, the fog will start, and it will end, or in other words, it will be completely black or purple at 128 pixels away. Or units, I guess. Not necessarily pixels in 3D. Okay. Now we need to add our movement. So add a new event. Go to key press and up. Drag over a code action. Okay, so we need to use the length dir functions again in order to get the x and y offsets. But this time we're going to use our target direction. So var vect x equals length dir x 32 target dir var vect y equals length dir y 32 target dir. Once we have those, we can move forward, but we'll want to make sure that there's not a wall in the way. We can use place meeting, the same collision function that we use in 2D. And so the collisions inside of this will be two-dimensional, but that's okay. Most of the time that's actually going to work, especially if you're making an older dungeon crawling RPG like game. It's not going to be high fidelity 3D. If you want that, you probably don't want to use GameMaker. Move forward. Wow. If not place meeting target x plus vect x target y plus vect y. Now we're using the target values and not our actual x and y values, because the target values are going to be the location of the player theoretically, and our actual x and y values are going to be what we're going to interpolate between. And so our actual x and y values will have weird kind of numbers in between, and we don't want to use those for detecting a wall because it won't quite work right. We need to use the target values. Okay, if we don't detect a collision, we update the new target values. Target x plus equals vect x. Target y plus equals vect y. Now we can actually duplicate this event, so right click on it, duplicate event, key press, down. Inside of here, we're going to name this move backward. Instead of adding, we're just going to subtract. And that will allow us to move backward. Update this. Okay, now we need to add turning. So add an event, key press, right. So we're going to subtract 90 from our target direction. And then you can duplicate this event for left as well. Turn left. And just add 90 instead of subtracting. Now the last thing we need to do is, you can do this inside the draw event. It might be better to put it inside of a step event. But just to keep things consistent between my blog and this video, we're going to place it in the draw event. It's not a lot of code, so it's going to be okay. We're just going to interpolate between our actual position and direction to the target position and direction. So dir equals lerp, dir target dir 0.1, x equals lerp, x target x 0.1, y equals lerp, y target y 0.1, and everything else should be the same still. And we should be able to run our game and see that we now have movement and some more depth with the fog. And you can see that we can't actually move into these walls. It won't allow us to move into them because we are checking before we move to our new location. Well, I think that's pretty cool. Not very much code. You can have a nice little retro 3D dungeon crawler going. And I hope you learned something. If you like this video, give it a like, share it on Twitter or whatever, and I will talk to you guys later.